Hey, what's up everyone? My name's Chris Winter, and last night I went out and tested the Canon 80D's autofocus performance in low light. Now, these shots were taken at around about ISO 3200, so it was pretty dark, and I've got to say it did work pretty well, and it is meant to be a little bit better, as Canon say the dual pixel autofocus has been improved in lower light conditions. Now guys, make sure to check out my top 10 list of the best lenses for the Canon 80D. I'll put a link in the description box below. But anyway, let's take a look at the autofocus performance in low light with the Canon 80D. So the first test here was face tracking autofocus, and essentially what I was going to be doing is walking back and forward to see whether or not it could keep my face in focus, and it did seem to work pretty well. Granted, we are at a wide angle here, so it shouldn't be too difficult, but you can see it did work pretty well. Now moving on, I went up to around about 55 millimeters, and this would be a little bit more of a challenge, especially for the Canon 80D, because in low light you can see that sometimes it did absolutely fail, but it was pretty quick to come back to focus. And I've got to say it wasn't that bad. So if you do have relatively slow movements, the autofocus face tracking was working pretty well, even in pretty dark conditions. Now the next test, I got my dad here to walk slowly towards me, and I was using the touchscreen to keep him in focus. And as you can see, he's walking relatively quickly and it's really having no problems keeping him in focus, which is pretty good. Even when he walks a little bit closer, the autofocus worked perfectly then. Now the next one, we're going to be using the touchscreen again, and we're going to be selecting different points. So I was selecting the back and then the Canon on the front and also the tree. And as you can see, it did work pretty well. Now the last test I wanted to do was moving my tripod and the camera, and essentially whatever was going to be in the little square would be in focus. As you can see, it did work pretty well. It did have a little bit of trouble focusing on that metal pole in the front, but anything behind it or the tree, it did seem to focus really quite well. So overall, I've got to say that the autofocus did work pretty well. It's not 100% perfect, but in low light conditions, a lot of cameras do suffer, but this worked pretty well. So there you go guys, just a little bit of a test to see just how well the autofocus works in low light. And to me, it did work really quite well. There were a few exceptions, and there were a few times where it did actually completely lose it, but overall it does seem to work really well, which means if you are going to be shooting documentaries and things, maybe even weddings in really low light conditions, the 80D might be a really good camera for you. Now guys, make sure to check out my top 10 list of the best lenses for the Canon 80D. I'll put a link in the description box below and you can check that out. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. See you next time.